All right, let's get right into it. Today we are talking about something pretty wild in the global tech war. It's this incredibly fast, really strategic counterpunch from Beijing, one that basically blew up Washington's plans in, well, just a couple of hours. And it all boils down to this one number, 48. It doesn't sound like a lot of time, does it? Seems pretty insignificant.
Well, turns out that's exactly how long America's latest big plan to control China's chip industry actually survived, just 48 hours. Then, bam, Beijing rolled out a response that was, well, let's just say it was devastatingly effective.
So let's talk about that 48-hour response, because the speed here is just incredible. I mean, only 2 days after the US announced its new plan, Beijing had its entire countermove ready to go. This showed a kind of strategic planning, a speed, that I think really caught a lot of people off guard.
Okay, so let's actually break down this timeline just to see how fast this all happened. So, on December 8th, the US makes its move. They announced this 25% tariff, kind of a silicon tax, right, on specific Nvidia chips going to China. The very next day, December 9th, China is already writing up its counter policy. And then boom, within those 48 hours, the whole response plan is locked and loaded.
So what China did here, it wasn't just some simple tit-for-tat tax. No, their countermove was way more complex, way more clever than that. They didn't just fire back with their own tariff. They built this bureaucratic trap. And it's all built around something called a permit system.
So here's the heart of their strategy, this permit system. It's not a tax. Not at all. It's a brand new approval process. So now, if a Chinese company wants to buy one of these high-end American chips, they first have to go to the government, and they have to prove that China's homegrown chips just can't get the job done.
And this is where it gets really fascinating, because this system turns a simple purchase into this huge state-controlled maze. So let's say you're a Chinese tech company. You need an American H200 chip. Well, first, you've got to submit an official justification to the state. And in that report, you have to spell out exactly why the domestic Huawei Ascend chip won't work for you. But here's the kicker. The final say comes from Beijing, and by all accounts, the whole process is designed to fail from the start.
This really lays out the two completely different strategies, side by side. The US goal was a tax. Think of it like a 25% levy on chip sales. They assumed China would just keep buying. But China's reality? It's a wall. It's a bureaucratic process designed to just block sales entirely. It makes sure China can't buy. One is a toll booth, the other is a complete dead end.
And this right here, this brings us to the absolute core of the strategy. It's how they flipped a key American assumption on its head. It's all about turning this idea of dependency into a weapon.
See, Washington's thinking was pretty straightforward. They believed that by selling China, yesterday's technology for tomorrow's prices, they could create this dependency. The idea was to keep them hooked, always needing American tech to keep up.
But then you have Beijing looking at the exact same situation and asking a totally different question. What if dependency isn't a weakness? What if dependency is actually a weapon you can use? And that is precisely what they did. Beijing weaponized the very need for US chips against the sellers themselves. This permit system, it forces Chinese firms to go on the record and explain exactly why American chips are better. Think about that. It's like they're handing their own domestic chip makers a perfect roadmap on how to close the technology gap.
So, okay, what does all this mean in the real world? What are the consequences of this big strategic flip? Well, the ripple effects are already starting to show, and believe me, they are huge.
Let's just start with a number. $12 billion. That's how much money a company like Nvidia made from China in just 1 year. And now, all of that is at risk. That entire $12 billion pipeline is now trapped behind a bureaucratic wall that, let's be honest, is basically programmed to say no.
And the impact goes way beyond just the money for companies like Nvidia. There are 3 major ripple effects here. First, this policy just supercharges domestic players like Huawei. I mean, every time a permit gets rejected, that Chinese firm has to turn around and buy from a domestic supplier. Second, like we said, that whole justification process, it's free R&D. It's a roadmap that tells Chinese firms exactly how to catch up. And third, well, when you block the front door, people find a back door. This is pouring gasoline on an already booming billion-dollar black market for these chips.
So where does all of this leave us? It feels like we're in a new Cold War, doesn't it? This tech standoff has definitely entered its next, much more complicated phase.
When you really get down to it,
That whole U.S. silicon tax plan was built on one single assumption, that the buyer wanted to buy. And what China just did was announce to the world that, nope, they don't. The deal is off.
So this leaves us with a massive question, one that is really going to define this entire decade. What happens now? Does the US go back to a hardline containment policy? Or does it let its chips get fed into this labyrinth, a system designed not just to strangle sales, but to actually help China build the very ecosystem Washington fears most? The stakes couldn't be higher.